Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Today's webinar is Logistics Rewired, Navigating Supply Chain Complexities in LATAM. We're really excited to have you join us as we discuss a region of the world that is near and dear to our hearts. Below, we'll begin by covering a few housekeeping items before we jump into the nitty-gritty of the webinar today. On your screen, you'll see a sidebar to the right of the main stage. If at any time you need assistance during the live webinar, please message us and us in the help chat located on the sidebar. You can ask questions through the Q&A tab through the webinar. Your questions will always be visible to you and our Flexport team, and we'll do our best to answer all the questions before the webinar ends. A copy of the presentation and the slides will be dropped in the chat, and an on-demand version of the webinar will be available shortly after the webinar concludes and can be accessed using the same link that you're using here today. To start off, just something quickly brief legal note. Please keep in mind that all the information provided in this session is based on the situation at this current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend you reaching out to Flexport experts to discuss your particular situation. So please reach out if you do want any help with any particular situation that you may have. So why don't we start? For those of you that don't know me, my name is Leo Ospina. I'm the Director of Partnerships for the Americas here at Flexport. I essentially manage all of our operations, growth, and strategy into and out of Latin America. With me, I have two amazing panelists. The first one comes with over 2 years of decades of experience working in the logistics space, where she has led substantial teams and helped companies build out large ocean portfolios. We're extremely excited to have Yasaida Jimenez join us, and she's been at Flexport for over 6 years, and she's going to be leading our north and southbound strategy into and out of Latin America. We also have an esteemed guest and great friend of Flexport, Stephen Liston, who's joining us today. He's the Senior Director at the Washington, D.C. office of the Council of the Americas, where he manages the Trade Advisory Group, trade policy, engagement in multilateral institutions, and member outreach. Through his substantial career in working with Latin America and the U.S. government, he has held posts in countries like Brazil, Peru, Chile, amongst many others. We are honored to have such a knowledgeable and experienced panelist join us today. So why don't we go ahead and jump in to the actual nitty-gritty of the presentation. So what we will be covering today. First, we're going to give you a quick sort of overview of Latin America, some tidbits that you should know about the region. Really, we're going to dive into how vast of a region, how diverse of a region it is. After that, we'll go into the current state of trade in Latin America so you can understand what is going on, how is COVID affecting the region, how are policies affecting the region, and really dive deep into the ocean market itself through Yasi's experience and her knowledge. After that, we'll talk a little bit about the opportunities and benefits as we look ahead of working in the region and as you're looking to potentially nearshore or diversify your supply chain into and out of Latin America. And then finally, we'll give you 4 pieces of advice, key takeaways that we think you should have as you're looking to explore Latin America as a place to diversify your supply chain. And at the end, of course, as I had mentioned at the beginning of the session, and my apologies for the mishap, we'll go through the Q&A and questions you guys might have for us. So first, before we get going, we'd like to learn a little bit about you and why you're joining us today. So before we start, we'd like a quick poll to learn a little bit about sort of why are you here? So are you here because you want to learn about Flexport's capabilities into and out of Latin America? Are you interested in hearing about nearshoring and the benefits of diversifying your supply chain? Or do you already ship into and out of Latin America and want an update on the state of the market? Or is there a whole nother reason altogether as to why you're going to be joining us today? Please let us know. We'll give everybody a couple of minutes so that you can go ahead and answer the poll. All right, looks like we have a few votes. Looks like a lot of you already ship into and out of the region. We'll give everybody a few more seconds to answer. All right, so it looks like we're pretty split. It looks like, 20% of you are actually looking to learn more about our capabilities. Another 20% of you are actually interested in hearing about nearshoring and policies. And 40% of you are actually shipping into the region already and kind of want to market update. So hopefully we'll give you guys all the information you need to know throughout this session. So let's start first with the LATAM overview and a little bit of facts about the region and what you should know about the region itself. So One of the first things that you should know about the region is that it's a pretty expansive region. It's a region that consists of over 30 countries, and it goes from Mexico all the way to Argentina and covers the Caribbean as well. That means that there are 30 to 35 countries that exist that have different languages, have different cultures, have different people. And the landmass itself is about 2.5 times the size of the US. That's pretty substantial if you think about how big of a region it actually is and how diverse it is. From a trade perspective, the region itself accounts for about $545 billion worth in trade, which is, again, a very substantial market. And so there's lots of opportunity. Languages that are spoken are Spanish, Portuguese, and French, and some English as well in some countries like Jamaica. And trade with Latin America isn't just one way direction, right? Trade with Latin America actually has numerous directions. China actually trades with some countries more than the US. Europe has major trade with countries like Brazil and Mexico. And the US, of course, is a major trader with countries like Colombia and Mexico. And so it's not just a one-way trade. Actually, Latin America offers opportunities for you to really diversify your trade lane in numerous directions. And it's really not just about one or two products, really. When you look at this slide, and these are some of the bigger export countries from an ocean perspective, you'll actually see that the products that are exported out of Latin America vary from tires to washers and dryers to car parts to wood to furniture. So really, depending on what it is you're looking for, whether it's apparel, whether it's furniture, whether it's wood suppliers, the region overall actually has a diverse group of suppliers that can really sort of apply to your specific supply chain needs. You'll just need to figure out where exactly that is and what countries that are and partner with somebody who can explain those to you. But Latin America isn't just an ocean market. It actually also is an air market. And so when you're thinking about your supply chain and sort of what you need to do to make sure you de-risk yourself, you shouldn't just come up with a plan that's focused on ocean, but really a plan that's focused on air, ocean. And if you're thinking about Mexico as a region of the world that you want to actually import and export into, cross-border trucking is also going to be a very important component of that as well. So as you're looking to partner with somebody and you're looking to think about a freight forwarder or somebody who can really help you dive into the region, think about all the solutions that you need to put in place and think about somebody who's going to be able to help you across the board. So next slide, please. So as we talk about, trade in the region itself, I think there are a lot of things that we also need to make sure we talk about. And obviously, Stephen, you and I haven't had the chance to talk in a couple of years and give one of these webinars. And I thank you again for joining us today. Can you jump in a little bit and tell us about what's been going on in the region over the last couple of years? What have you seen? COVID obviously has affected the region as much as other regions of the world.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Leo. It's really a pleasure to join you today. And man, a lot has happened in the last 2 years, right? I mean, feels like 2 weeks in some ways, but it's been a long time. The last time we talked, we were really focused on some upheaval going on in the region. In 2019, there were a lot of demonstrations, protests in a lot of countries, and basically, COVID shut all that down. What did it do? Well, Latin America was one of the regions hardest hit by COVID, both in health terms and in economic terms. In 2020, the economies went through the floor. There were a huge number of deaths, as well as illness, a lot of shutdowns. It was hugely disruptive to the region and its productive capacity. Last year, 2021, we saw a rebound, as we did everywhere else, but we also saw inflation take off enormously. Inflation was the highest they've seen in 15 years last year. This is before what we in the U.S. are going through this year. So inflation is a big problem. In addition, the IMF and others are predicting that Latin America is going to have the hardest time this year in terms of recovery, in large part because China and the United States are slowing down. And so commodity exporters aren't going to be able to export as much. So there's a real economic challenge that the region has to overcome. The benefit of that for those of us doing business is they really want to reactivate their economies. They really want to trade. They really want investment. So I think there's a lot of interest in these countries in attracting that. And then politically, we've seen a big shift. Some of your customers might have seen, read about, there's this big shift to the left. We have had a lot of elections. We have new presidents in Peru, in Honduras, in Chile, who are all left-leaning presidents. We have a new one in Ecuador who's right-leaning. We have elections going on this year in Colombia, Costa Rica, and Brazil. Also a chance of some left-leaning presidents there. What's going on? It's not so much about ideology at this point. It's really about this economic problem that people are having, not dissimilar to what we've had in the United States, where people feel like they're just not getting the standard of life that they want, and they're not happy with their governments. So all those problems that were there in 2019, guess what? COVID tamped them down, but if anything, they've gotten worse. But again, that means governments and companies are really hungry to reactivate their economies and to reactivate business and to try to get things moving again.
Yeah, I think, when you mentioned the left-leaning side of the new governments, it's interesting to me because for a really long time, it's always been pictured or imagined that left-leaning means, really left-leaning, socialist and not capitalist. And what I have found is that actually many of these left-leaning governments are hyper-capitalist, just more socially liberal, right? And so the Honduran president is a perfect example. We were discussing the other day, the fact that, the first head of state that she met with was Kamala Harris. And so even though she's left-leaning, really the bonds that they're trying to create in terms of are really with the U.S. and really trying to build a relationship with the U.S. And I think that is very true, especially for Central America and Mexico that are so closely tied to the U.S. I think it's a perfect opportunity to think about sort of left-leaning in a different way in the region.
Yeah, and we have, interestingly, I don't think that trade and economic policies, there is an interest throughout the region, in the U.S. and elsewhere, in more inclusive growth, right? In making sure people don't get left behind. That's certainly true in Latin America, as it is in the United States. But interestingly, the trade policies, the interest in the United States, we've sort of gotten very inward looking in the last couple of years. That didn't change much between the Trump administration and the Biden administration. So there's still a lot of work to do on that front. And the other thing, of course, that has surged over both the Trump and Biden administrations is this competition with China. And China is a big player in Latin America. They are the first or second trading partner for many, many countries in the region. So there's an interest, there's an understanding, I think, a growing understanding in Latin America of what trade with China means and what it involves for them. But there are many of them, especially commodity exporters, minerals, agriculture, very heavily involved in trade with China. But there is an increasing desire to do trade with the United States. They know the United States. The United States has been investment, continues to be the largest investor in them for a long time. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there. There's a lot of interest, whether governments are left-leaning or right-leaning.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very true. Great. And what about the GDP? How are we seeing GDP in terms of the region evolve?
Well, it's just not growing at the rate that it should be. I mean, the IMF is predicting maybe 2.5% over the region. Now, look, we're talking 30 countries, so there's a huge amount of variety here. If you're talking about commodity export countries, those with minerals, as you know, Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, Colombia, Peru, these have a lot of minerals that they're exporting. You're talking about agricultural exporters, oil exporters, very different picture here, right? Oil prices going up. If you're Suriname, Guyana, you're in good shape right now. Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, these are oil exporting countries. But what we're seeing overall is that growth is not sufficient, really, even real GDP growth, to keep up with population growth. This is a problem. They're not growing fast enough. So that's why they're so interested in doing more business in seeing more exports and having more investment from the United States and elsewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to see a lot of that in the upcoming months and in the upcoming years, even with the new elections of new governments. I think priority for them is going to be really growing the economy and ensuring that sort of they're a little bit more stable, to bring more quality across the map, right, for all of the people of the different countries.
I think most governments are really interested in doing that. They want to hear from investors. They want to hear from people interested in exporting, importing. What do you need? And so I think it's a great opportunity, as it is in so many places right now, a great opportunity to go in there and encourage that business.
Yeah, definitely. Next slide. And, Steve, I think a lot of people, next slide, please, feel that, Latin America is a small region of the world. It's not very important. But, we have this map here or this diagram showing a little bit about sort of, who are the U.S.'s biggest trading partners. And one of the big surprises here, for many people is probably that Mexico is just as big as Canada and China.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to bring this in thanks to our friends at ustradenumbers.com, that this great chart that just helps us situate Latin America, because I've been doing Latin America for 30 years, and I think Americans tend to undercount Latin America. They tend to not understand where it figures. So just a couple of interesting things. As you say, this tier one of these three large countries, Canada, Mexico, China, each account for 14% of U.S. trade in 2021. What we're looking at is trading goods in 2021 here. And then there's a second tier of about 10 countries between 2 and 5% of U.S. trade. Notice that the next Latin American country is Brazil, which is 1.7. Then that third tier, about 19 countries. But Brazil is essentially in the same place as Italy, France, and Malaysia in terms of the amount of trade it's doing with the United States. And then this next tier, we see Chile a little farther down, essentially where Spain, Hong Kong, and Israel is. Colombia does as much trade with us as Turkey and Saudi Arabia. So just to point out that there are about 10 of the largest 50 trading countries with the United States are in Latin America. So it's a major source of U.S. trade, U.S. exports and imports. And so I just wanted to sort of set that stage there, because there's huge amount of opportunity. And of course, these are countries that we have been trading with for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. And Yasi, next slide, please. I'd love to go a little bit deeper now into, what is going on in the ocean. Stephen told us a lot about sort of the politics and the trade, the policy, the GDP of Latin America. With COVID going on and all trade lanes really being affected by one crisis, whether it's a ship being stuck in a canal or a war in Russia and Ukraine or COVID itself. Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on in the ocean market here in Latin America? Yasi, you may be on mute. We can't hear you.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Leo. And hello, everyone. I'm very happy to assist everyone here with this webinar. As a general statement, the trade has been developing very well, positive, across the region, and its interaction, with every other region of the world, I would say, with Europe, North America, Asia, in the past years. You can see here that the development only from January through November 2021 was positive on the export side, with a 6.6% growth, and on the import, 26.6%. And then overall, the trade LATAM, you have highlighted in green what it means, right? And we already explained the scope, only with a 70.1% growth. These pretty much coming, of course, with these economies, all of the countries, and reactivating, after being or face a very hard lockdown in 2020, after when the pandemic just kicked in, that we had in LATAM are delayed reactions. We started seeing this first on Asia, North America, then impacting immediately Mexico, Europe, and for LATAM, we had like a replication that it started with us late, and it was a really roughly bad momentum, because when for the moment that it impacted us, Asia was already activating again, but they couldn't continue trading with Latin America because we were going through the whole negative motion. So, but this is pretty much the reaction in 2021, all of the market reactivating just to reposition inventory, in specific countries. And then when we compare the development against 2019, which is pre-pandemic, this is before everything started off, we could see also that there is a growth, also significant growth on the export side of 6%, and on the import of 17%, with a total trade, growth impact of 12% in the region. The main demanding countries, across the region are also displaying here. As Leo mentioned, we're going to be sharing the presentation, so this is going to help us to see, what are the countries really that have been leading this growth in and out within the region. Next slide to continue explaining what is the current state of the trade, please. So as I mentioned, the past 2 years, we have been seeing, a lot of challenges when the whole pandemic started, and landed in this market. I would like to start in remarking what is happening with the main hubs. We main up, as the ports like Kingston, Caucedo, Cartagena, Colombia. If we go to Panama, then on the Atlantic side, you have Cristobal, Manzanillo, and then on the Pacific, you have Balboa, Rodman. So all of these are key. Caucedo, Dominican Republic, all these are main ports connecting the world with Latin America. We have seen how these hubs have been, reaching their maximum operational capacity due to the heavy influx of import cargo. You saw right in the numbers before that inbound has been extremely strong because of the high demand out of the LATAM countries, and that has created, a lot of backlogs, booking restrictions, that comes off and on. We have seen the carriers just putting in place momentarily booking restriction, in particular for connecting ports, just because they are not able to cope with the amount of cargo, right, to transship, and having to put in place red flags not to receive more cargo, whether because they don't have personnel around the COVID restriction, or because they don't have the yards where to put these containers, or they don't have just the manpower to control all of the transferring of this cargo. So they have been putting booking restriction off and off. We have been monitoring this in the past years to see when the situation is getting better, when it's going back, and monitoring that very closely. The impact on that, of course, is the port congestions. You see vessels, delayed in order for them to unload the cargo, cut and run most of the time, cargo backlogs, being faced in all of these terminals, and of course, at the end, impacting the clients, because you also, at the end of the day, you cannot deliver as planned, and it creates delays. We also see capacity reduction across the region in the past 2 years that has been growing. There are two main factors for that. Number one is the high cost of the charters, the vessels renewable within the shipping industry. We saw how last year it increased 3-4 times, more than it used to cost in before the pandemic. And in some cases, the carrier were forced or being pushed to make the decision of just let those charters vessels to expire, because the market would not, and the commodities would not allow to pay for those increases. So we saw that coming a lot in intra-Central America, Caribbean, all of these connections. These charters were canceled, and of course that put a lot of pressure on the capacity, and but that has to do more with the cost. And then the second case or factor is being, ocean carriers also shifting larger vessels for a smaller vessel to offer in LATAM, putting these larger vessels in main markets in Europe or Asia, where the demand was extremely high, where they needed, to pretty much cope with the growth in these main markets, and that of course put also a little bit more in of this situation to tight more the capacity in the LATAM region. The equipment turnaround time also has been a lot of under pressure. As you can imagine, we face a bottlenecks, right? We talk about TPEs bound and how heavy amount of containers, keep sitting at the port internally in US that we cannot manipulate, whether because we don't have chassis or also challenges with the ground transportation deficit service, or even our shippers, not being able to manage the amount of containers that they need to unload. So all of these delays, of course, creates an imbalance on the equipment flow across the globe. And the only way for carriers to really manage this has been to put in place, restriction on the exceptions or extension of the free time. So we have seen also more and more being implemented in the past year. Another significant point is the schedule reliability, how deteriorated is being, and we don't see that improved. As an average in Latin America, we have 52%. Of course, it varies, by corridor, by area, but globally we can see that the last developing is on the 32%. And in LATAM along north and southbound, also ranging between 50-52%, the delayed, and it has to do with what I just explained with the port congestions and all of these delays and in the main hubs. What we also see as another point of factor that has been growing in such challenge, of course, is the sustained demand for all of the LATAM product. Steven already explained, right, what are our bigger trader partners here. And that demand has been so consistent, and the supply chain disruption also has created that these backlogs extend the seasonalities. Every market goes by season, every commodity. And as we haven't been able to cope, or the shipping industry to cope with the standard flow of these seasonalities, then they get extended. And sometimes we find a little bit overlaps, between one season and another in different commodities in a particular market that we also had to cope with, in this very challenging year. So I just recap here pretty much what we have seen that has been like the main factors, very high level impacting across the region and our interaction with the rest of the world. And I hope that is helpful, for you to have like a more holistic view of what we have seen change, since 2019 with everything started off different for the LATAM region. Outlook, well, we would like to have a more clear picture here, but indication with information that we have in hands right now is that the situation will remain the same as it stands, for the rest of the year. We don't see really any indication of any magical event, to happen that we could bring balance or some kind of normality to the region before, the pandemic. Also, we don't see the addition of capacity coming in soon. It will depend on two factors. Number one, the new deliveries orders, the ocean carriers, they have put in place new, larger vessels, more sophisticated vessels, right, that will be delivered to the market by end of 2023. It could be on evaluation that they cascade down some of larger vessels, that our terminals can cope down to LATAM, so that they can restore some of this capacity that were caught during this past year into the trade wherever it makes sense and the trade can afford, and that could keep a supply-demand balance. And also the charter cost, how soon the demand will down and charters also cost will come to some kind of decent, cost that a specific market can pay for it. And when I say specific market, I'm referring to the commodities, right? If the sector can absorb to have, X rate that will be able to pay off for that news agreement. So this is what the carrier will be monitoring and see, and that will be so pretty much two elements that will be considered for that capacity to be added to the LATAM again. Scheduled service reliability will continue under pressure depending on main trade lanes development, bottlenecks. I mean, we don't, if the bottlenecks continue so tight, in North America, China, and Europe, then it will just continue creating, the pressure on our service rotation here in LATAM as well, because all of these services are connected. The ocean carrier will continue monitoring, the operational spend with all of these port congestion, service delays. Of course, all of that will create pressure on the rate because they will try to recoup for or recover, any potential losses incurred by having to cut and run, leaving containers, rollovers in terminals, paying for storage. All of these additional costs somehow will be translated to the market within the rates, and we're going to continue seeing that at least for the remainder of the year, which means that rate will be on the high side depending on what areas and port pairings we are referring to. Next slide. Here are some recommendations more related to ocean, right? We today, when we talk to our clients, we highly recommend to prioritize the delivery orders, important shipments first. We always recommend to not combine, what is really, really important for you, not to interrupt your supply chain and your production or delivering orders, to combine that with orders that can be less important, because as I explained, having transshipments, congestions, port congestions on the hubs, also put at risk those shipments where you can have multiple containers in one bill of lading that will be the first one to be rolled out, right? Roll over in order for the carrier to alleviate the pressure on that connection. So we always recommend that this needs to be segregated. It's not in that with a priority list of importance. That's why we recommend to split the amount of containers so that it doesn't get stuck in the hubs. Alternate equipment size is required as well to whatever is available. Here we can talk about NORs. If you are asking for a 20 for a particular business, you can also work, with 40 high Q, 45 containers. I think that is more about taking or being aware of the situation, that this is momentary, that the market will get back to normal. We won't last this forever, right? And that we need to be flexible enough to make sure that at least our products do not stop shipping as needed, because we are not in a position today really to stick to our precise demand, because the whole supply chain is under pressure. And then forecast and provide monthly loading planning in alignment with your supplier is a must in today's market environment. We keep asking this right on a monthly basis, quarterly basis, so that we can line up with the shipping lines. And this is highly recommended because the carriers also internally can work and put efforts towards our planning. And we need to make sure that the clients at some point also they stick to that planning, so that they can make sure that everybody is at least on one goal, right, on what is exactly what can be achieved. So that I think that the most important part here is the communication flow. As we see so many elements that can happen, as much communication we can establish between supplier, consignees, and this whole supply chain, the parties involved, I think that that's highly recommended when we say, okay, it's not only about the forecast, it's about the planning. How is the supplier engaged with that? How is possible that of that cargo be really delivered on the timings that are being put in that plan, so that we don't spend too much time, in transactional conversations, or what can be done or cannot be done. And lastly, keep close communication on the new market development, trying to anticipate potential impacts towards your shipments and planning. I think that as much as you learn and are close to your service provider, to freight forwarder, to understand how this is evolving, because this is going to continue changing. There are trades or corridors that are a little bit more stable, but there are others that are very dynamic, like Asia LATAM is very dynamic, it's changing every week. We also have a lot of variety on the Europe, right? Intra LATAM also changing very rapidly. I would suggest that the communication is very close to your freight forwarder, to your service provider, so you understand what is evolving and how that possible change impact your shipment, so that you can really take measure or do any deviation or even a change, to another product, not necessarily to ocean, but you can combine to other type of transportation service offering that could, alleviate the pressure that you might see, depending on the situation on the ocean side. So this is pretty much what I have as a recommendation. Leo, now back to you to continue, the as per agenda.
Yeah, and I think Yasi, thank you so much for all of that information. That was really detailed and I think really important for people to understand. Yes, there are issues. Yes, there are issues like everywhere else in the market, but there are solutions and there are things that we can all be doing to really alleviate the pain a little bit. I wanted to also bring up one example here of a customer that's actually a Flexport customer. And what we saw over the last year and a half is that they actually switched their supply chain. And, this goes back to one of the original points that I made. You have to have a multimodal plan in place and you have to be agile, right? So we're talking a lot about agility, a lot about making sure that you're able to switch container types, but not just switch container types, but actually be able to switch modes as well if the commodity allows for it, right? This customer in particular saw that the ocean market was really falling apart. And for them, timeliness and making sure that their product arrived on time, this was a clothing customer, was key number one. And so what we were able to do was really find a solution and put a solution in place to actually get air freight out of Peru over to the U.S. and to Canada and into Asia where their products are sold. So just making sure you guys are, you're staying agile, you're thinking about different options, and that you're not just stuck on sort of what's worked for the last decade, because we're just in a very different spot right now. And as Yasi mentions, it's not going to be like this forever, but it is going to be like this likely for the rest of this year. And so, just it's something we want to push. We don't want to paint a rosy picture like everything is perfect. We don't also want to be gloomy and whatnot, but we do want to be honest with everybody about sort of what are the solutions that we're finding and what is working for other customers into and out of the region. Next slide, please. I think, in talking quickly about air, and we won't dive as deep in air as we just did in ocean, but, air is also very similar. It's obviously been affected by COVID. The fact that passenger flights are still not up to the level that they were before has affected the air market, and of course has affected specifically the southbound market that we've seen. So what we expect, for the rest of the year is that the southbound market will continue to be really tight, and we'll need to continue to plan ahead. And you'll need to make sure that, you have your partner who's informing you on what's available, what's not available. Similar to what Yasi said, prioritize what you need to prioritize, plan ahead, and try to give as much anticipation as possible to your partner as they're planning to move your freight. On the northbound side, perishables are going to continue to be sort of the ones driving most of the volume, and they're going to be continuing to take most of the volume, whether it's flowers out of Colombia or cherries out of Chile. Those are really going to be the biggest exporters that you're going to be seeing, and they're going to be dominating sort of the airspace. And then the last thing to consider, and I think Stephen talked a little bit about this, is e-commerce, right? One of the things, one of the big benefits of COVID, and I know COVID hasn't had a ton of benefits, but one of them is that we've seen a huge growth in e-commerce, right? Because people are staying home. Companies like Mercado Libre in Latin America was actually the number one company in Latin America for a short period of time, beating out a company like Petrobras in Brazil. So you're seeing that economies are changing, the way people function and buy are changing. And so we expect that lots of products will actually continue to grow. And this will likely mean that air volume continues to increase into the region as well. Next slide, please. So, as we're thinking about, and as you're thinking about sort of opportunities and benefits as we look ahead and we look at Latin America, I know a number of you were asking about nearshoring and potentially what are the options here. So we want to talk about 4 things that we think are really key and really sort of help Latin America stand out from other regions of the world in terms of trade with the U.S. So, Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about sort of all the different free trade policies that exist and sort of what makes Latin America special?
Yeah, well, thank you, Leah. One of the reasons that Latin America sort of punches above its weight is these free trade agreements and its proximity to the United States. And obviously, most of us are familiar with USMCA, the U.S. Mexico Canada Trade Agreement. That's why Canada and Mexico are so big, because essentially we have an integrated North American market. Things still have to move across borders, but the supply chains are pretty much integrated there. Uh, but we also have free trade agreements with Central America and Dominican Republic through CAFTA-DR. We have free trade agreements with Chile, Panama, Colombia, and Peru. And then we have sort of a next tier down of agreements called a Trade and Investment Framework Agreement with countries like Argentina, Brazil, Ecuador, Paraguay, Uruguay, and with the Caribbean Common Market. So we have a lot of trade agreements that help us spur trade, and honestly, they would like more. They want more access to the U.S. market. So there's a lot of interest, and that helps Latin America punch above its weight. The other thing you mentioned, supply chains. You hear a lot in the U.S. about onshoring. The reality is that for many products, onshoring for many different reasons is not going to be what happens. But what most companies are looking at now is resilient supply chains. If COVID taught us one thing, it's you don't want to be dependent on one country, any one country, for your supply chains. So a lot of companies are looking, how do I make sure that whatever happens, whether it's a war in Russia and Ukraine or a pandemic that's moving its way around the globe, I can do my supplying. So we're seeing Latin America. What advantage does it have? Well, it's close. It's close to the United States. So as you're looking to have resilient supply chains in the United States, we're hearing more about nearshoring, about ally shoring, working with friendly countries on these things. And I think we're going to see more of that. We haven't seen as much as politics might like, but we're going to see more of that going forward because it just makes sense for companies. Going strictly with the lowest cost supplier is not in the long term the best strategy. I think a lot of people have seen. So I expect that we're going to see more of that. And the e-commerce, as you're mentioning, just it's completely changed the way Latin Americans were working, just as it changed the way we're working. So I think we're going to see more interest in these digital economy and digital trade agreements and getting bigger areas where we can sort of make sure that we can do the sales of both goods and services across the region.
Yeah, I
And
think
of course, there's the cultural thing, right? You're going to talk about that, but the cultural I mean, we know each other for a long time. So go ahead. I'll turn it back to you.
No. It's fine, Stephen, and I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, no, I think you bring up very great points, right? The fact that Latin America is so close, a few things on that front. One, transit times are much faster, right? A ship from Colombia to Miami or to Port Everglades can be 5 to 7 days, right? Very different than if you're shipping from Asia, for example. Time zones as well, when you're dealing with suppliers, actually is truly an issue for lots of clients, right? You have to wait sometimes until midnight to be able to talk to your counterpart in Asia. Here, at least time zones are very similar. And with Latin America, I find that although we're different cultures, we're very similar. And one of the more important parts of really working and doing business with Latin America is actually sitting down and getting to know the people on the other side of the table, right? And depending on the country, you might be drinking a tequila, a mezcal, and aguardiente, or a rum with them. But it's a really important part of developing these relationships, and them being so close really allows you to do that in a very functional way, right? Miami to Colombia is 3 hours. Miami to Mexico City is 3 hours. Miami to Costa Rica is 3.5 hours. So it's rather close compared to some of these other places around the world where you might be looking to suppliers, and it actually makes the relationship much easier for people to develop and actually extend, I would say. I think one of the other big benefits too, and I don't want to overblow this because the price of freight is still pretty high compared to where it was a couple of years ago. But Yasi, do you want to talk a little bit about like where we're seeing pricing right now in terms of compared to other trade lanes of the world?
Well, it varies by pockets, right? It depends on what corridors we are referring to. We have seen really rates at some point competing with Asian TP eastbound, right? Which is the one that we monitor the most at the moment. But we have seen that compared to the east coast of South America to North America, for example, where we have seen significant increases in the past year. But they're comparable, I would say. Yeah, those were where you could see some similarities on the high side. But for the rest, I would say it depends. If it is intra-LATAM, if it is a short transit time, then we would say Central America, Caribbean, connecting with North America, the rate can be, I know, 3/3 of what we can see, in a main corridor. So I wouldn't like to disclose, numbers, but if we have to be specific, but I have to say that intra-regional costs are a lot lower, not in favor at the end of the day, because this is one of the reasons, right, why the charters have to be expired and vessels with no got renewed, or larger vessels we put in more profitable markets because the rates were absolutely more higher than what the Latin market was paying off, and not really on that advantage from a product perspective. But I have to see that you don't see really as much, the cost compared to the main corridors as Asia to Latam or Europe to Latam. You don't see those rate levels really flowing within the region.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is true that, supply was minimized because our prices were lower in the region. But overall, it does de-risk from a timing perspective. It does de-risk from like a supplier perspective. And I find that there is more stability, right, into and out of the region than in other regions of the world right now. I think the last point, that we wanted to make in terms of why Latin America might make sense for your supply chain is the variation of goods. As we mentioned in the slide earlier, and we're happy to send this deck out to everybody. Different countries produce different products. Whether you want car parts out of Brazil or Mexico, or you want plywood out of Brazil, or you want clothing out of Honduras or Guatemala or Peru or Colombia. Really, there's a big variation. Even medical products are starting to be developed in places like the Dominican Republic and Costa Rica. And so the variance is pretty great. You're just going to have to make sure that you're partnering with somebody who understands the different markets, who can really drive that understanding, and who can help you. And so why don't we go a little bit, and so next slide, please. I'd like to take another quick poll. After seeing sort of this presentation and learning a little bit more about Latin America, will you begin to explore your supply chain needs into and out of the region? Do you think you'll diversify your supply chain and your suppliers into and out of Latin America? We'd love to know and understand what you're thinking there. We'll give everybody 30 seconds to answer. All right. Well, it looks like a lot of you are saying yes, which is great to hear. Some of you are saying no, and we'd love to understand a little bit more. And you can reach out to us afterwards, and we can set up private meetings to understand sort of, hey, what it is you're looking for and what we didn't cover that you wanted to cover. But sounds like overall people are pretty excited about the opportunity of shipping into and out of the region. All right, let's continue. So, before we let you guys go, we did want to give you guys a few key takeaways and recommendations from our team here in terms of what's going to drive success for you in the region. So first, as I mentioned now a number of times, please partner with somebody who understands the region. They're going to help you move faster. They're going to help you allow to pick the right partners. They're going to help you develop a strategy for how you move your cargo the right way. Again, different markets will offer different products, whether it's Mexico with cross-border trucking or air or ocean or LCL. Pick somebody who can really sort of fulfill all of these things and all of these gaps for you. Two, I think a multimodal approach is really key. If the commodity allows it, I know there's some commodities that this is just not possible. But if it is possible, please think about sort of how can I implement sort of, even if it's 10% of my supply chain over to air, to give some balance and ensure that, the most important products are actually arriving on time and you don't have to shut down your supply networks. I think the third point here I'll give to Steve for him to speak on consulting with government and trade agencies.
Yeah, just having from where I sit and having worked in the government, I always want to encourage people to to consult with these government agencies. Every country has an investment promotion, export promotion agency that's really there in many ways to help companies do business in their country, that they're to encourage them, and that can often help resolve issues that you may be facing, that can help give a layout of where, what facilities they have, where it's worth doing business, where they want you to do business, what kind of incentives they give. And so talk to those export promotion agencies. The U.S. has its own export promotion agency, the International Trade Association. You can go to trade.gov. And I recommend highly, if you're looking at a new market, that you consider a gold key service offered by the International Trade Administration. You can go to your local Commerce Department office. It's a real value in terms of meeting, just connecting you with people who are interested in doing business with you through the U.S. government in that country. And that gets to the third thing, which is embassy trade officers. Every country has a U.S. embassy with someone who manages trade, either the Commerce Department or State Department. Talk to those people. Let them know you're interested and find out what they know about the market. They can be a huge resource, and they're also there to help you if you're having issues with anybody. So encourage you to do that.
Great. Thank you, Stephen. And then Yasi, do you want to give us a quick recap of all the great recommendations you had given earlier on the ocean side?
Sure. Well, number one, learn to use as many equipment types as possible, during these times. Provide monthly forecasts of volume to your partners, service providers. Split shipments as we recommended, right? The most important, do not let them to get combined, prioritize between what is important and less important so it doesn't get stuck, in the hubs. And most important, get closer to markets updates and understand, the dynamic. I think that is very key. Increase the communication across the whole parties involved in your supply chain, because that will minimize really the impact of your shipping planning. As much as you can get it in control, and anticipate what is going to happen. I think that's key, at least for the remainder of the year, so that you can act well advanced in time.
Great. Thank you, Yasi. Next slide, please. One other last poll that we wanted to take is, hey, if you want Flexport to reach out to you, I know 20% of you actually came to us today to learn more about our capabilities into and out of the region. That wasn't the whole purpose today. The purpose wasn't to sell Flexport, but if you are interested in having us join you or reach out to you, our group of experts, whether it's Yasi or me or somebody on our air team or any of our other important stakeholders who, work with the region day in and day out, we're more than happy to schedule meetings with you to talk about sort of our setup and our structure into and out of the region. We currently move a ton of business into and out of the region, and so please go ahead and answer the question. We'd love to reach out and hear about what your needs are specifically. So before we go right into the Q&A, one PSA that I did want to quickly talk about, of course, is the Ukraine crisis. For those of you that don't know much about Flexport, Flexport has an entire department that's called Flexport.org. Flexport.org does some of our best work, and honestly is near and dear to my heart and something I'm really proud of. They work, one, on carbon emissions. They work, two, to set up partnerships with nonprofits in the cities and communities that we live in, and so that we can volunteer. And they help nonprofit organizations also ship at cost. So we don't actually make any money off of helping organizations who really need to get cargo from A to B. During the PPE crisis, we shipped millions and millions, hundreds of millions of PPE goods into Latin America, into the US, and into other parts of the world as well. And obviously, we're trying to help with the crisis that's going on in the Ukraine. We have a big fundraiser going on right now. We've actually raised enough money to deliver one plane over to the Ukraine already with supplies. Our CEO himself is paying for a second plane to go. But we'd love for you to partake and really join us in this effort to to help the millions at this point of refugees that are fleeing sort of the crisis and the war in Ukraine. So go to flexport.org/donate if you want to learn more. And thank you so much again for joining us today. We have, it looks like a few minutes. We have like 3 minutes for some Q&A. If we don't actually get to your questions today, don't worry. We will respond. We'll make sure we send something detailed for you. But we'll go ahead and answer a couple of the questions that have come in. And the first one that came in is for Yasi, and it's from Beth, and she talks about exports out of Brazil and how they're growing, right? Brazil, of course, this major market for us in the region. What steps are carriers taking to increase capacity, Yasi? And are rates expected to remain high through the rest of 2022 into the East Coast ports? And I think this is perfect time to speak about, the congestion, not just in Brazil, but in places like Savannah as well, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I regret to inform that there are no really plans to increase capacity, at least for this year, in that corridor. It will remain under pressure. That is one of the areas where we saw capacity being reduced last year, which means that the rate will continue on the high side. So we don't see really that to be alleviated. Of course, I have to say that now in the recent quarters, it slowed down a little bit compared to the craziness that we saw in Q4 last year in 2021. I mean, cargo was getting rolled over and over and over, and there was no way really for you to get lifted. It was a complete nightmare. Even the carriers were shaking, on this planning. We don't see that now going on, but still capacity is under pressure. A lot of planning and conversation is required around that, with your service provider. But no, unfortunately, we don't see capacity being added, at least for the remainder of the year.
Yeah, Brazil's one of those markets that I think is just going to continue to boom. As inflation goes up, the real goes down, prices of goods in Brazil go down, which means that people buy more. Really, that is like the opposite effect of inflation that we see, I think. And in the last couple of years, if you think about the housing market in the U.S., interest rates were really low. People built homes, bought homes, remodeled, and I think that was a major part of why we saw lots of plywood, especially coming out of Brazil in record numbers like we hadn't seen it in the past. And so really, really, really interesting. But it's important to keep an eye out, on everything that's going on to understand sort of what's going to happen in the market, right? And it's not just the COVID crisis and all of these other, things, but the economy and how that plays a role in terms of supply chain and the congestion and where people are buying goods is also actually pretty key in understanding that as well. I want to quickly, one question for Stephen. Stephen, does Latin America, and I'm not sure if you're an expert on this, but have enough aluminum to divert business from China and Vietnam that's coming from US3?
Well, this is sure. I mean, when you say enough aluminum, it's got plenty of aluminum. It's got a lot of other minerals. Copper and lithium now is coming in as a big one too. I don't know how they compare on aluminum specifically, whether they can divert that, but it's really about a question of what people are willing to pay, right? And I think Latin America is going to factor in a major way for most of these minerals. My understanding is they are a major supplier. So China has slowed its growth. And of course, the U.S. has too, but the U.S. is actually recovering pretty well. So I think it's going to be a question of which economies are pulling that in. And I think Latin America, it's commodities. They're going to sell where the prices are going well. But China is going to be a factor for a long time to come in terms of global trade. It's in the long term, it's going to boom, and so I think we need to start figuring that one out as a country and as a region.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's incredible, like the diversity again, and countries like Peru and Chile have all these minerals, right? And I think we'll see a big increase in terms of what gets exported and where it gets exported to, And as I mentioned to you prior to this meeting today, you know, I think that we have an opportunity, and when I say we, I mean the U.S. has an opportunity to really sort of drive alignment and invest in the region and sort of strengthen our relationships. And I see that as a great opportunity as well for anybody looking to diversify into and out of the region. So it looks like we're at time, unfortunately. But as I mentioned to everybody on this call, we will be going ahead and answering all of your questions, sending you emails. Please reach out to us if you have any other questions. We'd love to set up a meeting to understand your supply chain needs and really dive deeper to answer specific questions about specific markets and trade lanes. We have all the information. It's just a matter of understanding what it is you need and when you need it by. But we want to thank all of you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed our chat today, and have a wonderful rest of your day.